This is Talking Drupal, a weekly chat about web design and development by a group of guys with one thing in common. We love Drupal. Recorded live on Wednesday afternoons in a Google Hangout. Visit us at talkingdrupal.com. This is episode 47, April 30th, 2014. Backup. What an interesting topic we have today, huh?
It's always boring until you need it.
Exactly. I think in our show notes, in the show notes that I put out on Google Plus, I called it the necessary evil, like taxes. You know, you can't ignore it. You'd love to ignore it, but you got to do it.
Definitely.
And I can't wait to hear some horror stories about backup. That's the first thing we're going to talk about. But before we do that, we welcome Jason Pimentel from HW Design. Howdy.
Hello there.
What's new, Jason?
Well, I did 2 webinars yesterday with Typecast. That was pretty cool. I've done lots of talks in person. I've not really done much online like that, but we had across 2 sessions about 700 or 800 people or so connect, and that was pretty fun. It went really well. You know, talking about using Typecast in a responsive design workflow.
Interesting. Are those online that people could go back and watch?
It will be if you go to, we can put it in the show notes, but
yeah.
If you go to typecast.com/seminars, they did one with Dan Radigan, they did one with me, and next month they're doing one with Dan Mall. So they've got some pretty cool people and me in there. And it's good. There's good stuff. They record everything and provide lots of slides and resources and stuff.
Great. Well, glad you're back this week. And we also have John Picozzi from Oomph. John, is that with 2 O's, 3 O's, or 4 O's? How do you spell that exactly?
That would be double O.
Okay. It sounds like it should be more, doesn't it?
Depends how much emphasis you put on it. But
all right. Oomph, right?
Yeah, we go with double O.
Fair enough.
So for those of you who are not seeing us online, John is wearing this beautiful pink shirt today. Looks good on you, John.
It takes a very strong character to wear pink, or so I've been told.
That's right.
No, this is my. I just got back from Florida, and I'm trying not to give up the thought of 80-degree weather, even though I got off the plane yesterday and it was 40 and raining. So.
Yeah, it's just awesome.
And we have Nick Laughlin from Enlightened Design. Hi, Nick.
Good afternoon. Yeah, backup is one of those topics that, you know, if you don't plan ahead, you're going to have a couple of sleepless nights. And it's something I've spent a lot of time working on myself.
So let's start this discussion by talking about some horror stories or success stories when we had ultimate failure, but we did have a backup. Because the stories, when you talk about backups, the stories are always the thing that get people moving in the right direction. And you know, this topic of backup has been on our agenda for a long time, and it just kind of sat there because it just seems like such a terrible thing to talk about. But
yeah,
let's just talk about it today, and we're going to address it from the perspective of, you know, backing up your own machine just to do your own work, all the way up to backing up your Drupal installation on a live server. So we're going to touch on a number of those things. So anyone have a horror story or success story they'd like to share? I can start with one if you don't have one.
Oh, I got a good one.
Oh, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I think we all do.
Yeah.
All right, good.
Well, you know, I think first off, I will say that for all the people out there that say, gosh, I've never heard of a hard drive failing, in the years that I've done this, I've probably seen physical hard drive failures at least a dozen times, maybe more. I mean, it's way more common than people think. And so I was one year down in Newport on July 4th, and I was hanging out with my family, we were having a great time, and started getting server alert messages. I was working for North Sales, the sailmaking company at the time, and started seeing all kinds of weird things going on. Services started to get really erratic on our web server, and sure enough, it just went down completely. And found myself on the phone with support, and they couldn't get it to reboot. And this was in the days of we owned physical servers in a data center, and they were going in and rebooting stuff, and nothing was coming back. And I ended up spending nearly 24 hours straight in the data center in Marlborough, Massachusetts, rebuilding a server. Thankfully, I had things backing up onto another machine. And I know that you mentioned this, backing things up isn't useful if you're leaving it on the same machine. So that's kind of an important lesson.
Right.
So it's, thankfully we had enough machines there. Things were kind of backing up to each other. So it was kind of an inexpensive way to sort of cheat it, to make sure that everything on one machine is over on the other one. So that one primarily had been the database server, then it just took over. I had to kind of reconfigure everything, but eventually got everything back up and running without any data loss. Service interruption, yes, but data loss, no. So that was July 4th in the afternoon until July 5th in the afternoon.
Well, according to BackBlaze, 5.1% of all hard drives fail within the first 18 months.
Wow, that's 1 in 20. That's a lot.
Yeah, it definitely is. My story is kind of a two-parter. The first is kind of a failure, and the second is more of a success. I was exposed to the need for backup pretty early. One of my first big clients, fortunately, it ended up not being my responsibility, but one of my larger clients in the beginning had several websites, and he was converting to using me as a developer, one website at a time. And he had this one massive website they invested several years and tens of thousands of dollars into, and he was going to be transferring that over to me, but he hadn't given me the keys to the kingdom yet. He was planning on giving me access a week and a half later, a week and a half after this incident happened. It turns out he had changed credit cards and not notified the hosting company. And so he missed 2 payments, and the hosting company wiped the server and deleted every backup, purged it. And it was like $20 a month. He missed 2 payments and deleted $10,000 worth of stuff. He had one backup from like 6 years before that was completely useless and didn't work. So it was a total loss. As I said, fortunately, I didn't have access. I spent a lot of time trying to recover it, and when I was unable to, taught me a couple lessons. 1, backup is important. 2, you can't trust host. Hosts back stuff up, but you can't trust them to be the only source of backup, because apparently they'll purge something over $40 rather than storing it for a week. The second story, which is more of a success, is the same client 3 years later, and this is another thing. It's not always hard drive failure or hardware failure. Occasionally it's user error. I had recently switched this client. At this point, I think he had a network of about 12 sites, and I had switched hosting companies because he had outgrown his last, and had switched from using cPanel to Plesk and wasn't entirely familiar with Plesk. I created a subdomain and pointed it at the doc root, and then realized I didn't need the subdomain, so I deleted that subdomain account. Well, apparently Plesk, when you delete a subdomain, deletes everything in the directory if it's pointed at a directory that's used by even if it's used by other accounts. So I deleted every single website that he had, as well as all their databases, somehow. Good news is, at that point, I had pretty robust backups. I think total downtime was between 10 and 15 minutes.
Wow.
I noticed it almost immediately, and when I deleted it and went, wait a minute, I wonder if that actually deletes everything, and then tried visiting the site and get the servers unavailable. When I guess it does, and I was able to rsync everything back up, and it was up and running. I suppose I didn't delete the databases; it was just the file structure. But like I
You know
said,
what's funny, Nick, is that user errors do suck, and they suck even more when they're you.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I
when
couldn't.
it's you in the user error, that's definitely it.
Yeah, it was, and luckily it was late at night, so it wasn't, people weren't really using the site at the time, so it wasn't a big deal. But if I hadn't had backups, there were at that point, I think I was 3 years into the project, and I'd probably invested about 2,500 hours into those sites. It would have been non-recoverable.
Wow.
But I have
So
met some.
I'll share a failure success story all wrapped into one, and it's really a different. It's not a hard drive failure. It's a whole different kind of thing. It's the situation where you say it can never happen to me, which would be the total disaster scenario. Back in 1999, we had just started hosting websites, and back in 1999, the hosting world was quite different. We didn't have like a tier 1 facility like we have now, and we sort of had a rack in an office, and we had about 3 months earlier just got our first significant customer and significant website we built for Sunoco, and the site was running, and my office in Virginia, Hurricane Floyd came through, and my office in about 12 hours had 8 feet of water in it, and the rack didn't go quite higher than that. So in addition to us losing our office and 2 employees losing their houses, we were completely shut off from hosting. We did have the wherewithal at the time, though, to have offsite backups. So within, I think it was 7 to 10 days, their sites were down. Within 7 to 10 days, we had another location set up, and all of their websites running as if they were, actually it probably wasn't that long. It was probably like 4 days. It was probably like 4 days that we got everything running in a new location. Thank God that we had the offsite backups, and that we could quickly make the length of time was making some DNS changes. We weren't too smart about stuff back then. Getting those things reconfigured and getting web servers pointed to new IP addresses. But we learned early on that, disasters actually do happen. So,
Yeah, working through that stuff you have no idea how many, as they say, single points of failure there are in the whole chain of somebody looking for your website and your server answering for it. I mean, there's a lot of places for things to go wrong, and a lot of them are outside your control.
right.
I mean, at least we can control some things, like having good backups, but things like DNS, like a DNS outage, I mean, that took, basically every schoolyard site offline for hours at a time. When MediaTemple had issues once, and then we had issues with Linode and their data centers, and we actually we still have our H&W site on a Linode server, which I desperately want to get rid of, because just a couple weeks ago they had a piece of hardware fail, and we were offline for 8 hours. And thankfully it was like overnight into Sunday, but there was no.
That's actually the worst, Jason. My horror story has to do with both of those things: a crappy hosting solution and a hardware failure. When I was in college, my roommate and I, being tech majors, thought it would be wise to open up a hosting company and to make some extra cash, which is not a bad idea. And we did that. So we opened up this, a pretty small hosting company. Bought a server from, I don't even remember the name of the company now. Didn't really know much about it. Just bought a server. And my roommate was actually very much into like World of Warcraft, and kind of would get gamers riled up. And apparently the hosting company was under some sort of attack, whether it was a DDoS or something like that. And our box was specifically under attack, and it essentially fried the hard drive within that box. So I really had no idea what was going on. I was in class, I start getting emails from clients like, my website's not showing up. This website's not showing up. That website. So I go and I'm like, no, the website's definitely not showing up. Like, DNS is trying to resolve, just not working. So I get home and I start making phone calls. So I call this company on their 1-800 number or their whatever it was, and I get a hey, leave a message, we'll give you a call back. Okay, so I leave a message, I submit a support ticket, don't hear anything back in like 6 hours. I'm like, oh god, okay, so now websites are down, I have no idea what's going on, can't access the server like at all. Call again. Finally, like 24 hours later, I get a phone call back from after dialing one of the numbers and getting this guy's girlfriend. Oh yeah, let me. I'll have him give you a call back. Finally, I get in touch with this guy, and I'm like, "What's going on? My server's down. Like, what is the deal?" He's like, "Yeah, looks like we had a problem with the server. It overheated. The hard drive, the hard drive basically fried." I said, all right, well, take another hard drive off the shelf, put it in there, and restore the backups. Yeah, we're going to have to see if we can get the files off of this hard drive. What do you mean? Well, the backups aren't essentially the end of the conversation was, we don't really have backups. I'm like, okay, well, get another hard drive and get something up so I can restore, yeah, I got another hard drive coming in the mail. It should be here in a couple of days. Okay, so you don't have another hard drive on site, and you probably don't have my files. Yeah, no, probably not. I said, okay, this is horrendous. Long and short of the story is I ended up getting the server and the files back up and running after probably about a week of downtime. Got all of my money back, and then quickly switched to MediaTemple, where I could run backups regularly on the server. But that's another instance of not really knowing. Trying to use a budget budget hosting provider, and not really knowing what the setup is, or having adequate backups on the information.
I think that's. It's an all too familiar horror story. I think I was not much better when I first started hosting things when I was working at Temple Games, and we had 2 Linux boxes in a closet, and when we had servers in our office in Providence when I had my own company, we at least had redundant drives, but still, I think it's just been a long journey to get one step further away from being that guy that is mail ordering hard drives to try and fix his hosting solution.
And here's probably the most important thing. And if you've dealt with backups, you heard this, but a backup's not a backup unless you can restore it. And sometimes just
good point.
Sometimes just having a backup of the files in the database isn't enough either, because, for example, if you configured a server, if you got a Linode instance and you install a bunch of different PHP libraries, and then their server goes down, you get a new one, yeah, you can move the files over, but do you have a record of what PHP libraries you have installed? Do you have a record of all the different virtual host entries that you have? I mean, it's not just the files of your website that need to be backed up. And that's true even if you're not configuring it yourself. Sometimes if you have to switch hosts, if one host had, curl installed and another host didn't, then, for Drupal, the constant contact module won't work if you switch hosts. So hosting and backing up very much has to do with restoring as well. An interesting thing is, I don't know how much you guys know about Netflix, but they actually have a service that runs, I forget the name of it, but it will specifically destroy parts of their website on purpose, their live website, to see how it will handle disruptions of service and restoring. And that's one of the reasons why they've built their site to have many different services. So occasionally you'll log into the site and you won't see any recently watched videos, or you'll log in and you won't see suggestions. Each section is redundant in its own service, so under load they can shut it off. But they have, in order to test their backup capability and restore capability, they have a program run by a separate division that basically just attacks their own site to see how they can handle recovery.
I'm sure
That's someone's job. That's amazing, isn't it?
Yeah, to destroy the website of the company that you work for.
I'm sure that script is probably very well guarded, because I can imagine that being quite detrimental in the wrong hands.
Well, and that's the thing. Like, it's a job where if you do it well enough, you're actually gonna get fired. Because I imagine if you take down all of Netflix for 2 days, there'll be some words.
I've actually, and this is the last story. I think we want to really move on, but I've actually had an instance with a client, and there are different levels of backup, and there are different levels that you need to do things at, and the company that I was working for, was boasting all of this backup solution, and it really wasn't there, or to the level that the client should have had it at. And I think that's something that you need to be aware of as well. You want to be redundant. You want to be able to get stuff back up as quickly as possible. But there are different levels of redundancy. There are different levels of backup. So we've all talked about having issues and being able to get things up. Nick said he was able to get something up in 10 to 15 minutes. Steve said he was able to get something back in 2 to 3 days, or within 24 to 48 hours. I think you really need to look at what your backup strategy is, and depending on how important the information is, depends on the level of backup that you're going to have and invest in, because it really is an investment.
Yeah. Well, and I think you bring up an important point. I mean, when you're dealing with backup and how you're getting back online, there's really two things that you're focusing on providing. One is guarding against loss of data, and the other is guarding against loss of downtime. And those are really two different things with two different strategies. I mean, it's one thing to make sure you don't lose any data and have really good integrity there, but it might take you hours to reconstruct everything on another service. And it's fine, they haven't lost anything, but they've been down for several hours. But then taking that a step further, you need to have integrity in the data, but you also need to have a failover or a fallback plan in place. And Nick gets the prize for being able to restore these things really quickly, but you have to have a place to restore them too. So I mean, and you need to be able to adjust DNS on the fly. And there's all of these things that go into being able to maintain the continuity of service that goes beyond simply having a backup.
Yeah, right. So that'd be a great show sometime in the future. I'm going to stick that on the list of, how do you create a high availability website, which is what you're talking about,
right,
to deal with all of these issues. So let's add that to the list and get us back focused on backing up. Let's start at the computer level. I mean, and work our way up to deploying in a live server. So right on your personal computers that you develop on, what are you guys doing for backup?
I'll tell you, honestly, the best thing, and this is, before I jump into this topic, in order to do an effective backup, you really have to be backing up, at least the experts say you have to be backing up in 3 places. So, a local backup, some sort of copy somewhere else, and then a remote backup is usually the three places that you want to have a backup. But locally, I've really enjoyed using, since I switched to a Mac, Time Machine. It's worked really well, and I actually have a time capsule set up in my house, so all the computers are backing up to that. And I've actually had to use it before, which is I'm sure everybody has at one point. But my hard drive failed on my laptop, and they're like, "Oh, we can put a new hard drive in, but do you have this stuff somewhere?" I said, "Yeah, I do." Really easy to get all the files back, and it kind of keeps a running tab of your files as well. So if you have an issue and you need to, that file, 3 days ago was the way that I need it, and now it's corrupt, or now it's been changed to the point where we can't get it back to where it was, you can always go back to that as well. So I think if you're running a Mac, having Time Machine set up is invaluable. It's something you have to do.
Is there an equivalent of Time Machine? So just for anyone who doesn't know what Time Machine is, it's the backup software that comes with the Mac, and you basically plug an external drive into your Mac, and it backs up. I think it's set for like every 15 minutes by default. But literally, I've had the same issues John had, that I had a major hard drive failure. I've gone to Best Buy, buy a new hard drive, stick it in the laptop, plug in Time Machine, and in probably like 5 hours, I'm exactly the way I was before the hard drive failed. Is there an equivalent that comes with Windows? I don't even know. Is it not Windows user?
Not that I know of.
There isn't, and one of the remote backup options that we are going to talk about is actually what I would recommend for a PC or a Windows user. Carbonite is something that I've used in the past on my Windows-based systems, and it works outrageously well. It's remote backup, so it's not kept locally within your house, which is actually better in some cases. I mean, my time capsule is right here on my desk, but if I'm not home and for some reason my house burns down, my backup is going to be non-existent. Now, if my laptop and my backup happen to be in the house when it burns down, well, then I'm really kind of hosed.
Well, and that's the important thing with the 3 backups. At least you need 3 backups in at least 2 locations. And I will also endorse Carbonite, I suppose, but it's not as enthusiastic. And that's just because I've had to restore from Carbonite before, and while it's possible, it's never pleasant. Just not to get into too deep of the details, but when you restore, Carbonite overwrites the security settings, which basically you'll get all the files in your computer, but you just can't access them unless you know how to reset security settings, which can take. So it can take a couple hours to download your files, and then a couple hours to reset security permissions. In general, the backup is pretty good, but it's not pleasant.
I mean, I think ultimately it's better than not having the files at all. So,
yeah, that's what I use it. I do use it.
So Carbonite is a remote backup system. Works via the internet. Basically, you install something on your computer, and when your internet connection is not working or not active, Carbonite will transfer files up to their server, and then allow you to pull them down or view them online whenever necessary. I have, when I had a PC, I think I may have used Carbonite once or twice, and it worked fairly well for the average user. But I think Nick brings up a great point. For the more advanced user, there may be some more hurdles to jump over.
I think we're missing a point here. Is that the local backup with an external drive on your computer is the way to back up your entire hard drive, the operating system, the total image of your computer.
Right.
Because it's fast to restore, it's got everything. The remote solutions like Carbonite and BackBlaze and a few others we'll mention can back up everything, but what they're really good for is backing up the data. So you don't lose your
Backing up
pictures.
files.
Yeah, you lose your photos, you don't lose your documents, you don't lose your programs that you've written. It's not really a great solution for restoring, and I don't even know if they can, by the way, restore your entire disk back to the way it was. Two different strategies here. The local strategy is to image your drive. The remote strategy for backing up, in addition, is to remove the important data and get it out of your physical location.
Quick note, I think you can, but you have to pay for like the concierge service, and they mail you a new hard drive or something. I'm not entirely sure.
Yeah. Well, so a few years ago, I did some work for a company that was doing an enterprise disaster recovery solution that was a combination, and that was really kind of interesting. So they would have an on-premise device that the whole network would be backing up to, and then it would also be backing things up automatically off-site. So it would give you that combination of fast to restore from the local physical device, but then if everything goes up in a fire, you still have absolutely everything off-site. Norton Ghost, by the way, is one in the Windows world that is not that expensive and has been around for a long time. That's good for capturing the entire image of your computer on an external drive.
Steve, here's a question. As far as what you were just talking about with the operating system and key files, does Time Machine back up the OS files for
you stick a new drive in your computer empty, and it can restore exactly the way your drive was before it crashed.
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
They do absolutely everything on that. You can set it. John, you can actually set it to only back up certain folders. And when you're adding a second backup destination, that's not such a bad idea. But it's, in general, its default behavior is to capture everything.
Sure.
And it can also back up external drives. So if you have a USB drive, that's like where you stick your data, you can have the Time Machine back that up as well. So basically all your physical local disks can be backed up. It's one point I wanted to bring up about remote backups. So we highly recommend local backups, and for us Mac people, we are all recommending Time Machine. Not sure about Nick hasn't really jumped up and down about anything for the PC side yet.
Mosey's pretty good.
No, I'm talking about local backup.
Oh, local? Carbonite doesn't generally do local.
No, it doesn't, right. So from a PC side, I'm not sure we have a recommendation for local backup. For remote side, it's getting your data files out of your physical location. I use BackBlaze. I've used Carbonite on the Mac. And I'm currently using BackBlaze. The only difference for me was the cost, and BackBlaze supports external drives. Carbonite didn't used to. I think it does now for more money. But for $5 a month, I can back up to BackBlaze every single disk connected to my machine.
Nice.
I've never tried to recover from it, but it is backing up.
I might be switching companies. I think that's quite a bit. I think that's cheaper than Carbonite, and I'm not a fan of Carbonite.
Yeah, it's definitely cheaper than Carbonite if you have multiple drives. And it works great. Other than the first backup, like for any of these companies, could take a significant amount of time.
Right.
I remember Carbonite was like, yeah, you can expect for it to take 2 or 3 days, when you're signing up for it to back up. I'm like, yeah, I'll probably be a little bit longer that night. And then it started and it goes, expected time to back up. I think it was 82 days.
Right, yeah.
It ended up taking 3 months. But yeah, that's another reason why I haven't changed, because it happens in those.
Talk about lock-in.
Yeah.
You don't want to go through that again.
Just out of curiosity, guys, did these services check the files as well to make sure that they haven't been corrupted and that they're still in working order?
Oh yeah, they do a really good job of doing like checksums and things like that to make sure that everything matches what's on your machine versus what they receive.
So one of the reasons I switched to BackBlaze was when we started recording this podcast. the amount of disk space that it took every week was gigabytes of stuff, and I had to move to an external drive. So my backup strategy with Carbonite was no longer good because I now needed to include an external drive, so I switched to BackBlaze. And that first install, like you said, Nick, I think it came up with like 162 days for me, but they did have a throttle in there that it could say use all the maximum bandwidth that I have available during these times, and it ended up only taking less than a week.
Wow. Oh, okay.
The whole thing up, yeah.
Yeah, I might be switching then.
So the other thing I wanted to bring up too is that Dropbox is another key piece for me in terms of, I don't really necessarily consider it a backup strategy, but it kind of is. So all of my files, like all the code that I'm writing, all of the documents I have, all of my files I use every day are sitting in a Dropbox folder.
Interesting.
That is technically a backup. So all of my important stuff is sitting in Dropbox and also going to Time Machine and then going off to BackBlaze. Which seems like overkill, but the Dropbox was really more of convenience to getting it from machine to machine.
Right.
When you really think about it, it's also a backup strategy. It's offline.
Yeah. Well, and I think what's interesting about that is also what you said. It's if you have a machine at home and a machine in the office, that's it keeps things in sync, but it also keeps that copy in the middle.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah, I had not really considered using it that way.
Here's a question about BackBlaze that I'm just reading this because I'm now thinking to everybody's got me scared that I don't really have an offsite backup. So BackBlaze will backup drives connected to your system. Is it physically connected, or will they do network drives as well?
Not sure. So I'm not sure.
Here's my use case. Right now I have, obviously, my time capsule wirelessly hooked up to all my computers. Would it be possible for me to back up my time capsule to BackBlaze?
You want to back up your backup to a backup?
Well, yeah, in case my house burns down.
I think there's a way to trick your computer into thinking a network computer is actually physically plugged in. So as long as you do that, it should be fine.
I have no idea. I don't know, John. I have a time capsule here too that my family's laptops are backing up to. They're not going off-site at all. I do wonder if I know Time Machine's a little fragile. I'm not sure if I could restore. I'd question whether I could restore the Time Machine from a BackBlaze and actually have that work. So, I don't know that would be worth the effort, but maybe it is. All right, so let's move on. We've really covered, I think we've covered the local development environment pretty good. Let's go up to server. So I have a server from Linode or MediaTemple or whatever. Let's talk about backing up the server first. Let's not get into the website yet. Okay, so because we get some other options with Drupal, the website itself, but just the server backup. I know that MediaTemple offers an imaging backup service that you can set up.
So does Linode.
I would imagine they all do, right? That you can back up an image of the server.
Yeah, and the problem I typically find with their option, both with Linode and I believe MediaTemple, maybe it doesn't happen with MediaTemple, is that you have to shut down the server to run the backup, to build the image. At least that's what I was told at Linode. I found that you could do the same thing with a small orange. You can build an image and download that. It's definitely very useful to have because you know that you'll have that snapshot, but it is something that you can't just do on the fly.
I've actually found MediaTemple just recently changed their backup options, and I've found that theirs are pretty good as far as backing up. But one that I really do enjoy is Rackspace has cloud files, and in their cloud server system has cloud backups, which is essentially automatic nightly, weekly backups. So you can set up your server to basically mirror right over on a nightly incremental and then weekly full backup, and that's really for the price and the what you're getting is I've found that it's the easiest and the best that I've seen so far.
I've had to use the backup provided by both, and it's been pretty serviceable. Neither one of them is really easy to go in and deal with stuff yourself, but having it there and being able to call up somebody in support and say, I need to get this thing back. And they've been really helpful, and it's been really fast. Get a database restored from the day before or something like that.
So I know on MediaTemple you can create a backup that does an image of the server. So, and it takes an image of the server and sticks it on the server, and then I would need to move it somewhere else if I need it, but I'm not really sure about what that would do for me, to be honest with you. If I had a major crash and I had this image of the server, can they actually take that image and stick it on another machine and have it work? I guess if the server was exactly the same.
Well, but they're all virtual servers, so generally speaking, yeah, that's the case.
Right. That should be the case. Okay.
Yeah.
So, I was gonna make a valid point, and then you asked that question. Now it's gone.
Okay.
I mean, I think what's worth noting is that one baseline that we're all talking about is having a dedicated virtual server, at least. And I'm sure that you can get backup services on cheaper solutions, but I think, again, we all also tend to say don't use shared hosting, get a dedicated virtual host if you want to have decent performance, and along with that comes these other services.
Yeah, so the point that I was going to make was also your hosting company, or if you're with a hosting company that's worth a darn, will do disaster recovery backups. I know MediaTemple definitely does these, and the reason I know that is because I've called them and asked them to restore from the disaster recovery backups. So what that means is every couple of weeks they'll do a disaster recovery backup, which is basically for them in case the hard drive fails or the server blows up or something happens on their end. But most hosting services do offer, for a fee, you can go into those backups and get a file out or get some sort of recovery from them. I know MediaTemple, I think, is a $5 fee per instance.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that you should rely on this other than doing your own backups, but it's also an option that is out there.
All right, so let's move on to your Drupal website. So you got like three important things in my mind in a Drupal website. You've got the code, you've got the files that were uploaded to the server, and you've got the database. Those are sort of the three things in my head that you need to worry about. So you could reconstruct the website if you needed to. So let's sort of attack this first at the database level. So, and that's the one that I'm always most concerned about, and the image files that were uploaded, because that's content that I can always rebuild code and download modules and get source code, but the content is something you can't easily recreate. So what do you suggest doing to take care of your basic database backup?
What do I use for database backup? Backup and migrate.
Yeah.
Is number one, the first line of defense. It's now standard on every site that I build, and I set it, depending on how big the site is and how often it's updated, I set it up to daily, weekly, or bi-weekly.
So this is a module.
Yep. It's a module, and you can set it up to back up the databases locally to the server. You can set it up to back them up remotely, and you can also set up different schedules. So you can even you can get very granular. You can tell it to back up specific tables once an hour if you wanted to, and then the whole database once a day. It's very flexible, pretty robust, and works great. It also allows you to restore. So and I've never, obviously want to test it, but every time I've restored, usually I'm restoring from the live site to a local dev site, but it's worked. It's worked great every time for me. The only caveat is you have to make sure the file bases are in sync as well. So if you
what do you mean by that, Nick?
So if you install the module on a site and then restore the database from to an older version of the code base that doesn't have that module, you'll get the white screen of death.
Could have issues, right?
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. Well, you definitely have to have it paired up with something. But I think it's the best analog that I've seen to when I prior to working with Drupal, I did a lot of stuff that with varying different platforms of developing content management systems. The back end was SQL Server from Microsoft, and they have really good tools for setting up backups and managing a database. And we would do things where we would have full backups like 3 times a day and incremental backups every 15 minutes. I mean, it was really set up to make sure we had as up-to-date data snapshots as possible. And while you can do that with the backup and migrate module, I think in most cases it's kind of overkill. But at the very least, you can set up a sensible, keep a rolling rotation of daily backups on one schedule in backup and migrate, and you can keep a daily backup for every day of the week for a week, and then have it get rid of it, and then keep weekly backups for a month or 2 months. I mean, you can actually have multiple schedules going, and then keep this sort of rolling window of backups. So it's really nice that way.
And one of the nice things about backup and migrate module is that it gives you the capability and encourages you to not store that data on that server. It gives you access to different services to move those backups to other places, which is the best place for them. One of them is Node Squirrel. I'm familiar with what Node Squirrel is. I've never used it, but it's a third-party service that integrates directly with backup and migrate. I wonder if it's from the same people.
It is.
On the module? Okay. Yep. And it's a service you can pay for that it plugs directly in, so when you do the backup, it leaves that server and goes to a Node Squirrel server. Personally, I've used the Amazon 3 service where it plugs right into Amazon 3. I think it's a little tricky to configure and work your way through the Amazon tools if you've ever tried to do that. It's kind of a hard thing to understand and get used to, but once it's configured, it works great. And they do have a 5 GB free bucket for you to put stuff in, which if you're deleting backups on a regular basis could be enough for you to keep a reasonable 7-day rotation on a database. That 5 GB bucket could be the right size for a smaller site. Has anyone used any of the other options that you have with backup and migrate for external storing of data?
No.
Some of them are FTP. They do have a Dropbox integration. And also right in here we have Rackspace cloud files. I guess it integrates with that. So I haven't used any of those last 3. But I imagine it's just as easy as using Amazon 3 or Node Squirrel.
Well, and one thing that is probably worth mentioning is that if you have a plan to back up the files in the root directory for your web server, you can also set that to back up the backup directory that you have for your database. Yep. So that's another thing worth worth thinking about.
So let's talk about that. What do you when we're talking about backing up the files? What is the strategies you use for that? So we've talked about the database with backup and migrate. So what are the strategies to back up the code and the physical files?
I've used rsync, and not regularly enough, but I've used that in some cases to set up stuff to go from one server to another, to create that failover and backup strategy.
So I've done something similar. I get kind of I have a couple of servers that are spread out among several clients, several smaller clients, and then I typically have a server. If I have a larger client, either space-wise or number of sites-wise, they'll have their own server, and I found it was tedious to log into each user or each server to rsync and back everything up. So personally, I just wrote a script that will log in, dump every database on the server, and then log in and rsync all the files and all those backed up databases to a local directory, and then and then it will pull a third script that will then archive, zip those files up, and then those files are backed up with Carbonite. I want to, the next step I think would be setting up an instance that will just have a server that will just run that script regularly on cron. The difficulty I've run into there, and this is probably a caveat that also exists for backup and migrate, is that most hosts, their terms of service specifically exclude using them as a backup. So if they find out that, like if you have those cheap unlimited plans, and they find out that you're just backing up files on there, they'll shut you down. So I never went that route just because I didn't. Either that, usually a VPS doesn't care, but they're usually limited to 10, 20, 30 gigabytes
Right.
a month.
Well, it's limited to whatever your service plan is. It has nothing to do with it being backup or not. It's whatever you're doing on that server.
Right.
Although depending on the backup, if you're using rsync, it's probably not a problem. But depending on how you're backing up, if you have enough traffic, they'll still boot you up based on the terms of service.
Right, but if you're using something other than rsync to back up a Unix-based server, you probably should get smacked in the head anyway, because it's just the most efficient way that you can do it.
Yeah, and it preserves permissions and so. I should do a search again to figure out how to automate that process, but.
Hey, Nick, for your scripting, are you using Drush to do the backups?
No, it's a bash script.
Okay.
So what it does is, so when I configure a new server for a client, I create a new MySQL user called Backup that has access to pretty much to read and dump every account, and then the script just SSHs in and uses that user to dump all the databases, and then it SSHs into rsync. Actually, I don't know if it has to SSH in, but it just rsyncs it down. But it doesn't use Drush. Drush is another option though, especially with aliases, but it doesn't allow. Actually, yeah, I think this was actually before I learned about Drush aliases, and Drush locally doesn't work that well anyway on Windows, so I don't know if I'll be doing that.
But I would imagine you could use, and I haven't done this either, but I would imagine you could create a script to use Drush to back up stuff for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's my understanding that you get. I mean, Drush has, I think it's archive is the command, and it will. I don't know if that one does it, but it will back up everything. I don't know if I think it excludes files though. I'm not positive though.
So, John, what are you doing to back up code and files?
Well, for code, we're using Git. Obviously, it's version control, which is kind of a form of backup. Obviously, it's not backing up all the site files on the server itself. So you're not going to be backing up your file folder in there. We're using Backup and Migrate actually quite a bit, and having that go to another server via FTP or SFTP. So we have those backup options in place, and for our for some of our Rackspace clients, we're using the Rackspace file backup as well.
All right, so you mentioned Git, and we were sort of chatting about this at the beginning of this phone call, which was, can you consider using a Git service like GitHub or Bitbucket? Could you consider that a backup of your code? And
Well,
to me, it's like saying that, is Dropbox a backup? Because it kind of is, right?
Well, I think it only is if you enforce a particular workflow.
Mm-hmm.
Because as soon as you stop enforcing that workflow, you break the integrity of it. So if you enforce a workflow where things cannot get to the live server without being checked into the Git repository,
mm-hmm.
then you've got a reasonable backup for the code for your site. But if at any point you can go on there with Drush and update a module or update code or install a module, you've just done an end run around it, and while you may remember to go do that on your own local site and check the code in, you may not.
Right.
Yeah, and the other thing is, most people will tell you Git is not a backup because you could still, the Git repository can be corrupted. So I mean, it's important to also have backups of your repository. I mean, if you're using a service like Bitbucket, it's the same thing with Dropbox. Although Dropbox does back stuff up, if you have a corrupt file in your local Dropbox and it gets put up, it's not a backup because it's still corrupt.
Right.
But Dropbox and like Google Drive will store a couple days worth of versions, so you can pull out the non-corrupt version.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, so it's technically not a backup,
right.
but
it's technically a backup of your current version.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and it gives you an easy way to push that
Right.
backup somewhere else.
Right, but that's actually an important thing to remember about your quote unquote real backup, is that if it's backing up a file that becomes corrupted and you don't notice that file has become corrupted, it's going to be backing it up until you need it, and then you may or may not have a history that goes back far enough to find an undamaged file.
Actually, that reminds me of I had a client that had a file and they approached me quite irate that there was a broken file, and even though I've never touched it, it was my responsibility, and they needed it immediately. And I think we had 6 months, and they insisted that they used it every day all the time, and we had 6 months of backups, and it was corrupt in every single version.
Oh.
And it was like, well, yeah, you use this every day, and this is critical, needed immediately, but you haven't noticed in 6 months that it's been broken. I think I ended up recovering it somewhere else, but it was from a version that was over a year old. But yeah, it's a good point. Besides needing the backups and needing the recovery plan, there needs to be some kind of verification and testing as well in place. So.
Okay. Do we want to say anything else about backups? Have we missed anything here?
Have we said it enough that it's important and you need to do it?
No, why don't you say that again?
Do something
Yeah.
instead of nothing.
Right.
The first step of plugging in an external drive is at least the first step towards safeguarding theft of your machine, hard drive failure, overwriting something that you didn't need to overwrite. And that's the coolest thing about the Time Machine interface, is you can go into it in a given window and just scroll backwards through time until you see the file that you just lost and just grab it back.
Right. So let's move on to our module of the week. And it's not a module, it's actually a theme called Shiny Theme. So a few months ago, I was looking for a new admin theme to throw on a website, and reached out to Nick, and he said, "Hey, why don't you give Shiny theme a try?" And I did, and it was actually a really nice theme to implement for admin. Nick, you've used it in a number of places?
Oh yeah, I use it on pretty much every project now. It's great because it's subtle. It's subtle improvements over 7, but it's one of those things where once you start using it, if you end up going back to the 7 theme, it's like niche that you can't quite reach. It's fantastic. It makes everything just a little bit nicer, and the cumulative effect is quite large.
And it's responsive. The responsive version of it is pretty good. I did think that the columns, right, didn't support multi-column, if I remember correctly. Is that correct? Multiple columns?
But that's basically that's the same issue with 7.
Yeah, exactly, right.
Yeah.
Which initially I was looking for an admin theme that was multi-column, but I ended up finding Shiny, and it worked pretty good, so I was pretty happy with it. So we recommend that as a nice admin theme to take a look at. The notes on the theme say it's used in Commerce Kickstarter version 2. So if you're familiar with that theme, it's the Shiny theme.
It's fantastic.
It is fantastic. So let's wrap up episode 47 Backup. So, Jason, talk to us. Where are you? Where will you be? Will you be with us next week, or will you be somewhere else?
No, I will be here.
Awesome.
I will be around for a few more weeks before I'm off to DrupalCon. So that's exciting. But yeah, so at jpomentel, pretty much everywhere, and you can find out a little bit more information about something that I've got coming out really, really soon. If you take a look at typeresponsively.com, my book on web typography will be coming out from O'Reilly very, very soon.
Very cool.
I'm pretty excited.
Excellent. Yeah, that's great news. We've been waiting for a long time for this.
Yes. So have I. So have my editors.
Yes, and wow, you could have at least made the website responsive. It is. I'm just kidding. All right.
It's also not even the right title anymore, but that's okay. I'll have the official word on that probably later today.
All right, great. John Picozzi, tell us.
Tell you. You can find me at John Picozzi on all the major social networks, and always on at umfink.com.
Okay, and we have a Drupal meetup coming up May 14th.
May 14th, yeah.
We'll be hearing from the excellent fellows in Brown University.
We are, yeah. Brown's going to be coming in telling us about how they're using Drupal and how they've used Drupal over the past 3 years to build a great platform over there that they use on almost everything.
Awesome. And we do have an announcement coming about Brown in the near future. We'll just leave a little tease at that. So, Nick.
How you doing? You can find me pretty much everywhere at NicksFan. And if you want to see some of my work, you can see it at enlighten.net.
Excellent. And I'm Stephen Cross, at Stephen Cross with a PH. And talk to you guys next week.
All right. Cheers, everyone.
See ya. Bye.